Hello, FISMA Friday friends. It's always great to be back with you as we slide into another weekend. And today we are going to discuss what FDA food code requirements could impact companies who manufacture, process, or distribute food items to retail, restaurant, and other types of direct to consumer food companies. Now, if you're just joining FISMA Friday for the first time, we're glad you're here. This is a monthly series which is brought to you by Safety Chain and the Acheson Group, and it's designed to provide expert guidance on the current and emerging updates that surround the Food Safety Modernization Act. And it also serves as a chance for you to join the conversation by asking our food safety experts your questions. But before we dive in, we just need to get through a couple of housekeeping items. First, we've muted all attendee mics, but as mentioned, we've left room at the end for some Q&A, and all you have to do is enter your comments and questions into the webinar panel during the course of the presentation. We will absolutely do our best to get to them all. But if we happen to get carried away with a hot discussion and we couldn't address your question by the end, don't worry, we'll get back to you afterwards. And yes, we are recording this session, so please keep an eye out for the replay link and the slides. We'll email those to you shortly after the presentation. All right, let's go ahead and meet our speakers. I'm delighted to welcome back Dr. Lily Yang, who some of you may remember has helped us through some common issues with meeting FSVP requirements. Oh, such a good topic. And she also gave us some great suggestions on how to create accessible food safety training programs. So welcome back, Lily. And we're also joined by Dr. Karla Acosta, who has tremendous experience in retail food safety and food safety training. So thanks again for joining us today. But before we dive in, would you both mind spending a little time telling us a little bit more about your background?
Sure, I can go first if Dr. Lily Yang's okay with that. So I come from El Paso, Texas originally, so Spanish is my first language. I did my PhD at the University of Houston, and prior to that, I was a health inspector in Houston for about 5 years. So I have a lot of experience from the retail food establishment side of things. And then after my PhD, or I should say during my PhD, I focused on food safety training, specifically with low literacy individuals and people who didn't get the chance to learn how to read or write. How do you train those individuals in food safety? So that's what I focused my PhD on. And then I proceeded to become an adjunct faculty for 2 universities. And after that, I have joined TAG. I recently joined TAG last October, and now I am a food safety manager here, where I'd be happy to help you with any food safety training or food safety needs in general that you may have. I'm happy to be here. I'm excited. It's my first FISMA Friday.
Oh, and it won't be your last. All right,
It will
Lily,
not.
let's hear a little bit about your
Oh my gosh. Hi, everyone. I'm Lily. I'm a senior food safety manager here at the Acheson Group. And I also want to say welcome, Karla, to the conversation of FISMA Friday. Super stoked that you're here. My background is in food safety and food safety education, specifically as it relates to risk communication and consumer-facing or industry-facing crisis communication. And a lot of what I've done in the past 3 years has obviously been throughout whatever is needed in the industry, and I've had a lot of retail experience as well as meat industry and produce safety experience. So please feel free to ask us any questions, because both Karla and I are here to create and hopefully help people create more accessible and more inclusive food safety programs, because we are in a diversified world and we want to make sure that everybody that is part of this conversation has a seat at the table.
Absolutely. All right, let's hear some FISMA updates.
Oh man, all right. So let us start with our regulatory updates from the FDA. So as you can see here, there are quite a few regulatory updates from the FDA that we'll touch on briefly. Actually, we're going to talk about every one of them. So probably something top of the mind for many companies, especially those that are probably making baby foods or children's foods. The FDA recently released a draft guidance, aka recommendations for action levels for lead in food intended for babies and young children. As we all know, the FDA continues to work on its Closer to Zero plan. This guidance, on the other hand, provides information for the industry on what lead action levels might be. So for reference, if you want to jot that down real quick, 10 parts per billion for fruits and vegetables, mixtures, yogurts, custard puddings, and single ingredient meats, 20 parts per billion for root vegetables as a single ingredient, and 20 parts per billion for dry infant cereals.
Yes, and then the FDA also released its 2023 priority guidance topics for food programs that it hopes to visit and review this year. Now, some topics include some questions and answers, so some Q&A regarding food allergens, its labeling, cross-contact, etc. And then other aspects will discuss new dietary ingredient notifications and related issues. And there's also going to be draft guidance for the cultured animal cell foods industry that may be looking for pre-market consultation. And the FDA will review its draft guidance for foods derived from plants that have undergone genome editing. And so to that, the FDA is also going to bring out labeling of plant-based alternatives to animal-derived foods, which is really exciting. And additionally, the FDA will also provide action levels for inorganic, arsenic, and apple juice, and much more. So be sure to look out for some exciting updates and an exciting year ahead.
And as we go further into the world of plant-based alternatives, that's all up and coming and still going and going strong, the FDA has also released new draft guidances on labeling of plant-based milk alternatives. So we obviously know that consumers know that, soy milk, almond milk isn't really milk, but the FDA is now recommending that plant-based milk alternative products can continue, as we said, to be labeled with their milk terms, but must have a nutrient composition that label that is different than milk, which includes a voluntary nutrient statement that conveys how the product compares with milk based on USDA's Food and Nutrition Services guidelines. So the Food Milk Institute's nutrients and the criteria, it shows people, hey, this soy milk may not have XYZ that the regular dairy milk might have, and so on and so forth. The idea for this is this will allow consumers to better make informed dietary choices because, again, they realize that plant-based milk isn't milk, but what exactly is the nutritional differences, and we want to make sure that they are staying on top of that.
Yes. And we really do care about our babies, of course. So as such, the FDA has issued draft guidance to infant formula manufacturers and those that test infant formula to better design, conduct, evaluate, and report protein efficiency ratio rat studies. And so since the proteins are the sole source of nutrition in infant formula, the FDA wants to make sure that the protein quality is well determined. This also provides more information that firms can see when considering that firms can use when they're considering the development of new infant formulas to submit to the FDA.
And let's be honest, most of us all probably love some good chocolate. And in a letter of enforcement discretion, the FDA announced that it's not trying to poo-poo the use of certain qualified health claims regarding consuming cocoa flavonoids and high flavanol cocoa powder and reducing cardiovascular disease. But they really wish that the qualified claim is appropriately worded so as not to mislead consumers. In fact, after reviewing the science, the FDA determined that there is a very limited credible scientific evidence for a qualified health claim for cocoa flavonoids, specifically in high flavanol cocoa powder, and it's linked to a reduced risk of cardiovascular disease. So in an effort to enforce this, the FDA has also provided language on what it's going to be okay with. However, just to note, this only applies to high flavanol cocoa powder and not regular cocoa powder or food products made from cocoa beans, for example, chocolate.
And as we all know, CBD is becoming even more popular. So it's being used in foods and beverages and a whole lot more. Now, after a review, the FDA concluded that we all need a new regulatory pathway for CBD to balance individuals' desire for access to CBD products with the regulatory oversight needed to manage those risks. Now, the agency is prepared to work with Congress on this matter, and in this, the FDA has also turned down petitions that requested CBD products be marketed as dietary supplements. So be sure to stay tuned for that.
And last but not least, the FDA has also announced it will start conducting consumer research to further explore front-of-label packaging schemes to help consumers, especially those that may have less nutritional knowledge, to quickly and easily identify foods that are part of a healthy eating pattern. And this type of packaging, if any of you have traveled abroad, you've probably seen that it's been adopted in many other countries around the globe. In this, the FDA remains committed to empower consumers with nutritional information so that we can all make healthier choices while also encouraging the industry, that's all of us here today, to innovate and to produce healthier foods. Whew, that's a lot of going on. Thanks for tuning into that. All right. So today we're going to briefly go through and talk about a few different topics that we've merged together, starting with the FDA's updated food safety culture review, which should also have been on our updates, but since we're going to talk about it now, we'll also start there and then dive into the FDA food code, which is what we're here also to talk about, and what we can pull from the food code into the manufacturing world, and then talk about how all these get mashed together and the updates to the 2022 food code, what's changed, what we can learn, and how everything obviously ties into food safety culture. And to begin with, because we don't like keeping people waiting on the cookie, we always start with the big cookie. So these are the top 4 big cookie takeaways that we want you to leave with. Number 1, as we all know, food safety culture is applicable and necessary. We all know this, and we'll discuss some big learnings from it, how it impacts both the retail side and the manufacturing side equally. Additionally, we also want to re-highlight and rediscuss sesame. We all have had other conversations about sesame. We know it is a nice big allergen that has been added, and yet we know that with undeclared allergens already being a huge issue, we're going to probably see more of that and what we can do about that. Finally, we also want to talk about washing hands, because there's been a change in the hand washing compliance, and we'll talk about that as well as talking about donating safe foods and what that will look like. We're going to start out with Karla, who will talk to us and carry us through a discussion about food safety culture and the food safety culture review.
Yes, so we will talk about food safety culture for a bit, and starting with the FDA in their new era of smarter food safety blueprint, they incorporated 4 smarter food safety core elements. So as you can see on the screen, core element number 1 is tech-enabled traceability. 2 is smarter tools and approaches for the prevention and outbreak response. The core element 3 is new business models and retail modernization. And what we will talk about today, food safety culture. So with that, in one of their initiatives, the FDA released a systematic review of the scientific literature on food safety culture as a foundation for the FDA's work on food safety culture with industry, consumers, and within the agency. Now, as part of this effort, the FDA commissioned a systematic literature review to produce a synthesis of the published literature to answer 3 overarching questions. 1, what is food safety culture? 2, how is food safety culture developed and maintained? And 3, how is food safety culture assessed? Now, in the next slide, in the literature that was reviewed, the most frequently cited definition is from Griffith, Livesey, and Clayton, who define food safety culture as the aggregation of the prevailing, relatively constant, learned, shared attitudes, values, and beliefs contributing to the hygiene behaviors used within a particular food handling environment. So, of course, that includes food manufacturers and almost everyone that's tuning in with us today. Now, next slide, please. While there is not just one approach to establishing, developing, and sustaining a food safety culture, researchers have identified numerous key determinants, which are also referred to as elements or components, that contribute to a food safety culture. So the key determinants identified consistently can be summarized as leadership, and that's kind of self-explanatory. Leadership being, what are the leaders, the managers, the shift supervisors doing on a day-to-day basis? How is their communication? So what is the communication within the organization amongst each other? If there's a food safety risk or hazard, is that being communicated to the right people in the right amount of time? Commitment to food safety. So that is the organization's, how they handle food safety. Do they make sure that there's plans implemented in place so that they can address the food safety concerns as they occur, correct it on site? And then risk awareness, that's your awareness of food safety risks that exist. So are you aware of the physical hazards, biological hazards, chemical hazards? And does that matter to you? Environment. So environment consists of, is the environment in the correct place in which it needs to be? Do they have the right resources? What is, the temperature like? Can it even sustain the temperatures for the walk-in coolers, walk-in freezers, and things like that? Accountability, of course. So if there is a food safety risk or a food safety mistake that is done, it's okay to do mistakes as long as you fix them or have a plan in case those mistakes happen and you take accountability for that. It goes into the food safety culture of, hey, if my employees make a mistake, they feel knowledgeable enough to know what the mistake was, who to report it to, how to fix it, and again, taking in that accountability, which again also kind of goes into the employee knowledge, attitudes, behaviors, and values. Now, like most systems, there are challenges and barriers to establishing and maintaining a strong and effective food safety culture. So barriers that were identified in the literature include over-reliance on food safety management systems, prioritization of cost saving and money earning, organization size, frequent staff turnover. This is probably one of the biggest ones that will be a challenge to your training, and optimistic bias. Now, the literature also describes some best practices to promote food safety culture, including promoting food safety culture as a necessary and critical business matter for all employees, and branding the organization's commitment to food safety culture, along with framing food safety culture with an ownership mentality and promoting food safety culture throughout the organization's supply chain. Now, in April, make sure to tune in where myself and Dr. Ben Miller will talk your ears off about food safety culture more in depth and how it is assessed, and of course, how TAG can help you in this food safety culture assessment of your organization. Now, Lily will discuss a little bit more about what the food code is for you.
Thank you, Karla. Thank you for talking it through, and we're excited to tune in April to talk more about food safety culture, because let's be honest, it's super important. So what's in the food code for you, and why does this even exist? Well, as many of you might know, the food code is a model for safeguarding our public health and ensuring food is unadulterated and honestly presented when offered to the consumer. It basically represents the FDA's best advice for a uniform system that addresses safety and protection of food offered at retail. And so when we talk about retail, this could be your restaurants, your markets, your QSRs. It can even be vending machines. That's the whole thing, right? It can also go be hospitals, schools, etc. And aspects of the food code are defined to not only prevent foodborne illness, of course, which is what we're all doing, but also to stay in line with scientific updates and findings, which it is very regularly updated. It used to be updated every 2 years, but now we are updating it almost every 4. And while the food code is a federal national guidance, every area, every state, local regulation, incorporated body, or reservations and all will have their own adoption of their version of the food code, either using older food codes, adding amendments, better suiting things for their purposes. Ultimately, as we anticipate, the goal is to protect public health. So for example, how can this be helpful to you in manufacturing? We've received questions from manufacturing plants sometimes that they're like, wait, what level of light is enough light to light up the space? So there actually generally isn't a list of guidance that you can find in the FDA CFRs, but if you look at the food code, there actually is a discussion and recommendations listed. You can actually find this in 6301.11. This can also extend to, like, for example, what minimum water temperature is recommended for hand washing to still achieve clean, squeaky clean hands, or even what should certain types of products be labeled as. And don't worry, we'll talk more about this as well. Additionally, the food code, like with all that is already happening, is intrinsically tied to providing safe food to consumers, but also incorporating aspects from top down and bottom up to create good food safety culture, which Karla already alluded to. Those persons in charge, as we also see in other areas of the food industry, also need to undergo training and ensure that all others have undergone training and are practicing good practices. Finally, something that was of interest that we wanted to talk about is that this is the first time the food code is addressing food donations. And obviously within manufacturing as well as production, we do talk about the food donations as well. And it's interesting also to see how some of this can be applicable. As we also think about this as well, the food code also impacts the overall supply chain because as we know, we're all tied to this, right? We are all either producers, manufacturers, which all go on to other customers. Customers are potentially oftentimes retailers, and everything will end up in the tummies of the people and the consumers, and we also want to make sure that it is safe. So ultimately, we're here to create a little bit more standardization and talk about how some of this may apply to you. So what's changed in this newest edition of the 2022 Food Code? Surprisingly, quite a lot. And if you look at the summary of changes that's found on the FDA site, it's a whopping 19 pages. Of course, a lot of it is clarification text, as one would imagine. But the ones that we're going to talk about that we found to be most interesting or that could be applicable to you, we will talk about as well. But we're also going to highlight a few things right now. Please bear in mind as well, some retailers also have manufacturing plants, and those that might have manufacturing plants may be either supplying directly to consumers or back to the retail side, right? So some things that did change were actually some definitions and what things were classified as. If anyone has any remembrance of mechanically tenderized meat, now it has an updated meaning, and it even has a new time temperature cooking requirement. So mechanically tenderized meat means any manipulation of meat by piercing with a set of blades or a mechanical device which breaks up muscle fiber and tough connective tissue to increase tenderness, including injection, scoring, and processes which may be referred to as blade tenderizing, jacquarding, pinning, or needling. And why is this important? Because sometimes, especially when you have mechanically tenderized meat products, it looks just the same as an intact cut. And so there are also new time and temperature cooking requirements. So if you are a producer that also produces MTM, please don't forget to also take a look. In fact, they also redefined intact meat into meaning a cut of whole muscle meat that has not undergone comminution, mechanical tenderization, vacuum tumbling with solution, reconstruction, cubing, or pounding. And I know it bears reminder for this because sometimes we may think one thing may be one thing and another may be another. So just wanted to clarify that. Another really big thing that has come out of this is the major food allergen, now including sesame, which is our 9th major food allergen. And to that, we also have ready-to-eat foods now has a much clearer definition than it did before. What is actually included and what isn't, and we'll look at that as well. There's also a bunch of definitions involving seafood. So if you are a seafood processor or fall under seafood HACCP, maybe taking a quick look at this because it might be interesting information. For example, commingling now means the act of combining different lots of shellfish, and they redefine molluscan shellfish and also the term shell stock. So these were interesting aspects to think about as well. To that, other aspects have also changed, including affirmations that the person in charge needs to ascertain that food employees are obviously maintaining the time temperature for safety foods during thawing and through daily oversight of routine monitoring. Additionally, employees need to be properly trained in food safety and also really understand food allergen awareness, which especially with a 9th allergen is fairly important to remember. There has also been compliance with food law as it pertains to meat. In fact, if a retailer were to be a retailer, so a retailer would be like a restaurant or a market or whatever it might be, were to use a, quote, whole muscle intact beef steaks that are intended for consumption in an undercooked form without a consumer advisory, they must either A, obtain meat from a food processing plant that does not mechanically tenderize, vacuum tumble, reconstruct, cube, or pound these whole muscle intact beef steaks, or use meat that is deemed acceptable by the regulatory authority based on other evidence indicating such. There's a whole aspect, and it all needs to meet the definition of whole muscle intact beef, aka can't be coming from somewhere that also does mechanically tenderized beefs. There's also more discussions about food donations, which we'll also cover, but something that is also probably important to each and every one of you is specific to hand washing and the change in hand washing temperatures, which I'm going to leave for the next slide to leave you all guessing. And as we know, hot water, while not necessary for hand washing itself, is very helpful in getting off oils and other gunks on people's hands. So as we all know as well, super hot water and also super fast spraying water really isn't going to do much for good hand washing compliance, right? No one's going to be like, oh, I'm going to put my hand under this really boiling hot water for like longer than 5 seconds. Similarly, no one's going to want to put their hand under the hot water if the water's splashing at them real quick. In fact, that creates other issues as well. But really, let's focus on the 4 things that are most likely to be interesting to you all. Sesame label. What does the definition of ready-to-eat foods actually have expanded? Hand washing foods, and perhaps food donations as well.
All right, now with hand washing. So in one of the many changes in the food code, there was one in particular that has made a very big difference to the industry. So Chapter 5 of the food code for water, plumbing, and waste states that, as you can see the amendment on the screen, they revised the hot water temperature at the hand sink from at least 38 degrees Celsius, which is 100 degrees Fahrenheit, to at least 85 degrees Fahrenheit, or 29.4 degrees Celsius. So lowering the water temperature has been a long requested issue, as research has demonstrated that water temperature has little to no effect on the overall hand washing efficacy. However, warmer water temperatures certainly make it more comfortable to wash hands and may lead to better overall compliance. So this lower temperature is likely to result in energy savings as well. And this is something that we can also get into during the Q&A, but that was one of my frequently cited violations was hand washing. You know, as people see the health inspector walk in the door, they're like, oh, gotta go to the hand washing sink. And then oftentimes that would actually result in their violation because they were doing it incorrectly. One of the things that I did notice was at that time, it was hard for individuals to wash their hands in, scorching hot water. But with this temperature difference requirement, it will make it a lot easier for individuals to basically not have an excuse to wash their hands. Now, of course, although the temperature requirement has changed, the procedure itself hasn't. So remember to continue training your employees in proper hand washing practices and focusing on the hard to reach areas, making sure it's for at least 20 seconds, and ensuring that you self-audit to keep all of your hand washing sinks readily available so they're not blocked and stocked for employees with the proper equipment. You'll need, your soap, your paper towels, and a trash for the paper towels. Now, when to wash your hands is also as equally important. So whenever your hands become dirty, anytime you change any task, or when handling allergens, and which we'll talk about in the next slide. But just remembering that, you have to train your employees and create this food safety culture of washing your hands frequently and doing it correctly. So now we'll go to Lily as she discusses allergens.
Thanks, Karla. So we're talking about sesame and also allergens as a whole, just so you can also be cognizant of it when you're out there in the wild looking at the market being like, hey, what's going on? So as we all know, hopefully by now, right, sesame is the new major food allergen that reflects the Food Allergy Safety Treatment Education and Research Act of 2021. As of January 1st, 2023 this year, I can't believe it's 2023 already, sesame is become the 9th major food allergen. And as some retailers also have manufacturing sectors and may also be manufacturing products for both their storefronts and for their grocery store shelves, it's also important to note that you must be labeling sesame as an allergen. And failure to do so can lead to Class 1 or Class 2 recalls, whereas in the past it would probably have been a Class 2 recall. In that, sesame also goes under a bunch of different names and are found in many products that may be being produced. Some names include bene, bene-C, gingelli, sesamol, sesamolina, simsim, till, and tahini. Yes, tahini is sesame paste and it contains sesame. And I know I'm preaching this to the choir here, but there have been definitely a lot of consumers who have looked at me and been like, wait, tahini is sesame? Yes, it is. And so make sure you are labeling with common names so that consumers know, and actually everyone, including whomever you are shipping to, know what it is that you are actually referring to. AKA, maybe putting bene or sesamol might not be something that whomever your customer is actually knows what that is. So definitely put a parentheses and say sesame, right? Just like with all the other food allergens, we want to be specific. And we want to make sure that we are using common names that aren't scary sounding and that are accessible to everyone. We can't expect that everyone will automatically know what any reference is. Additionally, if you are in the supermarket, consumers now must be made aware in writing that of any food allergens that are present in any unpackaged foods and also at the bulk bins. So next time you're out shopping out or when you're shipping out one of your big tote bags that may or may not be used to fill these bins, and you will also definitely be labeling this, definitely continue to remember to label your allergens. And in this, remember, traceability is always really important. And to that, don't forget to label your sesame. That is the real thing. We're going to move real quickly to ready-to-eat foods, because it turns out the food code has a little bit longer explanation than what 21 CFR 117.3 has. In 117-3, we see that our ready-to-eat foods is defined as any food that is normally eaten in its raw state or any other food, including a processed food, for which it is reasonably foreseeable that the food will be eaten further processing that would significantly minimize biological hazards. Cool. Seems very generic. Also seems very to the point. So let's expand on that a bit, because the food code actually had a really good discussion on this. Ready to eat, as defined through the food code, now encompasses all of this: raw meat, poultry, seafood that is cooked or microwaved to the appropriately defined temperatures and time, raw fruits and vegetables that have been thoroughly washed in water or in a vegetable wash solution so that there isn't any dirt or contaminants, plant foods that are cooked for hot holding, which means they're being held for heating, to 57 degrees Celsius, which for us Americans is 135 degrees Fahrenheit. All TCS foods. TCS, as a reminder, for some is temperature controlled for safety foods, must be cooked to the correct time and temperature. Also, that ready-to-eat foods also include substances derived from plants, for example, spices, seasonings, and sugars, bakery items like breads, cake, pie fillings, or icing, in which further cooking or food safety is not required, and also includes the following products produced in accordance to USDA guidelines that have lethality treatments. This might include sausages, dry fermented sausages like salami or pepperoni, your salt-cured meats and poultry like your prosciutto ham, country cured ham, Parma ham, and dry and poultry like jerky or beef sticks. Additionally, those food manufacturers that are part of the thermally processed low acid packaged in hermetically sealed containers also are considered ready to eat. Ready to eat, though, does not, and I feel like this is worth noting because apparently this was an update to the RTE definition, but also this is probably what you and I would consider, would not include commercially packaged foods that already bear a manufacturer's cooking instructions, and foods that a manufacturer has provided info that it has not been processed to control pathogens. That does not seem like it would be ready to eat, but hey, I guess there have been enough issues that this has come up and is now in the food code as a definition. All right, finally, we're going to talk real quick about food donations. So about 1/3 of all food in the U.S. actually goes uneaten, and to limit food loss and food waste across the food supply chain, and also to ensure that safe, good quality food gets to those who need it most, the 2022 Food Code clarified that food that is stored, prepared, packaged, displayed, and labeled according to food code safety provisions can be donated. So as you see in this picture, everything here is packaged and displayed. What isn't displayed here, and I'm sorry, this was like not a good example of that, is the labeling. Everything should be labeled, like what's in it, what allergens are in it, right? That's all very important. Something to also be considering on the perspective of manufacturing is often that we may have lots of extra food that may end up going to food recovery organizations. And it is always important to have this pertinent discussions with food recovery organizations also about how they want to manage food products that you are donating to them, especially as it will pertain to safety, things that may be open, half open, should we ensure that they are sealed? And if all else fails, kind of going back to the safe food donations of this being that food that is stored, prepared, packaged, displayed, and labeled according to the law and the food code itself can be donated. Remember, regardless of the extra food that is out there, we do want to provide safe food to consumers despite wherever and however it may be. All right, so to tie us up by the end of this, we are going back to our big takeaways. Firstly, like we talked about, like Karla has brought up, food safety culture is important and through all of this, right? We also have to ensure training is happening. We need to ensure that we are building smarter tools to approach outbreaks, that we are creating risk awareness and the environment and accountability and employee knowledge all around, from top to bottom, bottom down, to bottom up, to ensure that we are producing safe food. Additionally, we want to remind everyone that sesame is a new allergen requirement, and if there is a lack of sesame labeling, that could be real bad. Hand washing is important, and now we have better temperatures, arguably. Well, I would say 85 degrees is probably much better than washing my hands at 100 degrees Fahrenheit. But that's a personal opinion, yeah? And then finally, it is always important to continue donating safe food, and when in doubt, definitely take a look and see what the food code has to say about that and how you can be a responsible donator of safe food. So we want to say thank you all so much for attending. We really enjoyed this opportunity to speak with you all, and we can't wait to see you next month. Please let us know if you have questions.
You know we're gonna this was outstanding. I mean, I'm having so much fun just listening to all of the different pieces that you guys have put together. The food code is enormous. I mean, try reading that before you go to bed. Holy smokes. But you broke down the main points. I really appreciate it. I took a ton of notes here. And we got a lot of questions in, so let's dive in. The first question came in actually as we kick things off. It said, concerning state regulations versus national regulations, what are your thoughts about state level cottage food laws for home food production that have no home regulation regarding the safety of those foods?
Definitely. And thank you so much for asking that. Like, cottage food laws is its own beast. This is something that we could go on and on about because, for example, one of the individuals whom you all have heard multiple times speaking, Eric Edmonds, has done a lot of work in this space. Unfortunately, or fortunately enough, because this is a much more complicated question and it's a little bit out of the scope of this conversation, I believe, we would be happy to have a separate conversation with this individual about this, and would love to also, you know, if we want to make it a larger conversation for FSMA Friday conversation, we totally can, because there's a lot that can be said. Sorry, I don't mean to just back out of that question, but I'm also this could lead to a whole chain. But thank you for asking it.
Yeah, we'll definitely follow up with that one. Again, it was earlier on in the presentation. So yes, we will get back to you for sure. Okay, let's talk about the allergen, because that's where we kind of ended up on. Does the FDA, or how does the FDA determine when to label a food as an allergen? Is it by an illness report?
From what we understand how the FDA determines, I think there is a lot that is relevant to the research that is out there, as well as, yes, a lot of it is research and also medical reports. And then from there, as they build up more information, they are able to make more determinations, right? I mean, this is kind of like if you look at peanuts, for example, and especially looking at local and like school even regulations, for like, well, we shouldn't be bringing more peanuts into schools, or people can't be bringing them into lunches, because then we have found out that, you know, there's a lot more people who are allergic to peanuts. So I'd like to answer your question briefly. It's usually by research and medical reports or statewide reports to the FDA. Karla, did you want to add anything on that? Wanted to make sure that I had answered that properly.
Yes, you covered it. But, you know, it's also important to note that this is, of course, kind of in terms of trends. What are allergens now in the past were not as prevalent. Of course, that it wasn't happening. It just wasn't as common back then. So as the government sees fit, whenever there's enough cases to support having it as an allergen, as one of the big 9 now, then that's when the further discussions and research goes into it to make it a requirement.
Okay. Now, one of our attendees is talking about the Canadian food safety regulations, and how, I guess, in Canada, and this is not my expertise, but perhaps you know, that the requirement is that the statement "may contains" is suitable for Canada. So how does that relate to what we just chatted about today in terms of proper labeling and allergens?
All right, so I'm gonna guess that most of y'all on this call and listening on this webinar right now do know about FSMA, right? And maybe a bunch of you have taken PCQI, so the Preventive Controls for Qualified Individuals for the human foods. And if you haven't, low-key slide. We also teach that here at TAG. You can get that out of the way there. But I did want to say that in the as it stands right now, FDA does not. Let me rephrase this. In Canada, you can say may contain, and technically in the United States, we can also say may contain. However, you should be doing your darn tootin' best to make sure that you are still not cross-contacting allergens on allergens. You should also know what your product actually has as an ingredient, and if it does have sesame, it shouldn't say may contain sesame. It's got to say allergen, sesame, right? Yes, but even if you are producing within the same space that may have potential for cross-contact, the may contain statement does not cover your butt against not having good proper sanitation controls and good proper allergen controls. Does that make sense? I hope I answered that question. Please let me know if I can elaborate upon that.
Alexander just came in. Yes, may contains is not an acceptable replacement for proper PC plants. So yes, I think we're getting the affirmative there. Okay, good. Let's switch gears a little bit. Nancy wrote in, this was about one of the amendments here. The term ready to eat food, to indicate ready to eat food does not include, that statement does not include, was not in the 2017 version. So does this mean that the FDA will now accept cooking instructions in a food safety plan?
So for that question, I will have to check back and get back to you if you don't mind. That is something that I did not look actually as far into as I should have. And thank you for asking that.
Yeah, that's a great one. All right, we're going to move over to RTE foods. Couple questions here. Aren't dairy products such as cheese and yogurt included as RTE foods?
Technically, they should be, but I was reading the directions, and that wasn't part of the definition. I will get back to you as well and double check that as well. But based on the definition of the RTE, it should be, well, based on what we know of RTE in 117.3, it should be. But let me also double check on that as well.
All right.
Yeah.
Now you gave some examples. Oh, sorry, Karla, did you have something to say?
Oh, no. Yeah, but based on the definition of ready to eat, like Lily said, we can double check for sure, but based on the definition of, no further cooking or processing needed, so it's literally ready to eat, I would say that yogurts would definitely fall under that category. So these may be like additional RTE foods that weren't previously defined as a change to the FDA food code.
Okay. One question came in around, can we expand a little bit on the raw meats that were listed under the RTE categories? Can you give a few more examples of that?
Definitely. So let me see. Though it's basically any products that fall under the USDA guidelines. Oh, sorry, raw meat. Okay, I see where your question is. Sorry. Let me go back. Oh no, I'm going the wrong direction, aren't I? I apologize.
That's the wrong. Yes, that's all right.
Raw meat, poultry, seafood. So when we talk about raw meats and poultry and seafood, if you flip to that section in the food code, they are referring up. They have tables and charts referring to like different pork as well as beef and so on and so forth, because basically the idea is that ultimately you can't just obviously feed people raw meat, poultry, or seafood. So they need to be cooked or microwaved to the appropriately defined temperature. So the raw meats that were mentioned, especially in the food code itself, was specific to, let me see, I did see there was chicken on one of them. There was like beef, pork. So that kind. Does that answer that question, or would we need more explanation on it?
I believe so. I think they were just looking for a little bit more detail around some of the meats.
Oh, definitely. Okay, so for some of the meats, it's in section 3401.11. 401.11. So 1 second here. Give me 1 second. 3401. This would include beef, corned beef, lamb, pork, cured pork roast such as ham, as well as eggs, fish, meat, and poultry. This can also include fish let me see. They also have temperatures defined for rat types, non-insect meats, comminuted fish and game animals, a whole list of them. But for the whole meat roast, you might include beef, corned beef, lamb, pork, and cured pork. And let's see, steaks also are part of that, beef steaks, as well as, eggs, fish, raw marinated fish, molluscan shellfish, which, as we told you, has its own new definition. And hopefully that kind of answered that question.
Okay. Yeah, the RTE questions are coming in. I just got one here. Are frozen meals and other foods that need to be microwaved prior to consumption recognized as an RTE food?
So based on the conversation relative to what the food code says, commercially packaged foods that bear a manufacturer's cooking instructions and foods that a manufacturer has provided info that it has not been processed to control pathogens are not part of the definition of a ready-to-eat food specific to the food code relative to retail side.
Okay. All right, that works. Oh, they keep coming in. Okay.
I know, RTE is so confusing, right? There's so much in it.
All right. It seems like it could be misleading to include generic spices as an RTE. Spices would need to be treated. Is this called out?
Right?
Okay.
And that's
Nancy.
the thing, the definition itself, and it's so funny, right? Because this is only in the definition section that they have updated. And if you read the definition section, right, especially as we all know, spices have issues. That's why we talk about irradiation. So can you just put fresh spices? And there's all these other aspects to it. This was a definition change more so than it was this was a definition change. And so no, in the definition, it does not address what that safety protocol or what you would be doing to prevent hazards are specific for spices.
Yeah, I forgot to mention Nancy. She also mentioned that RTE Foods does not include commercially packaged food that bears the manufacturer cooking instructions and food for which the manufacturer has provided information that it has not been processed to control pathogens. Was an earlier comment there. Let's talk about donations. What about food byproduct donations for animal feed?
So if you are donating food to the animal feed and you have also been or are also of the PCQI human foods vibes, you should be donating foods in a safe manner that also falls along GMP practices.
Okay, that works. Here's an interesting one from Crystal.
And if you do further processing in your facility of any of these foods that will be donated as a byproduct, you will also then, I believe, fall under the animal foods preventive controls regulations.
Got it. All right, I'm going to keep on the donations. As Maggie just came in here, were there any new requirements for traceability in relation to donations? That is a great question.
That is a great question. And I will say that from the side of having been working within the Conference for Food Protection, big shout out to the Conference for Food Protection, since I know a lot of the aspects that kind of go into finagling the food code kind of happens in the biennial conference, which is actually coming up this April. There have been discussions that have revolved around what should be done for the safety of food donations and so on and so forth. However, that is not actually addressed in the food code for this upcoming. However, there are guidelines online from different food recovery organizations that focus on food safety and what you should be considering. And I believe the food recovery, I will, if this is okay for everyone, I will also follow up with this because I have worked with different groups that have worked in this space to provide guidelines for this. I believe at North Carolina State University, they have worked on that as well. and I believe as well with Feeding America and other food diversion organizations have also focused on this as well.
Okay.
And actually, Feeding America has a fairly good food recovery initiative / guidelines for that safety, as I believe properly North Carolina State does as well.
Got it. I got an interesting question here from Leanne. When teaching students that will be employed in food manufacturing, what training programs do you recommend? That she recommends here, Serve Safe or some other certification?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Is this for manufacturing?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Any food safety training, I would look into what's your specific operation, what topics may need to be covered. Of course, it has to cover personal hygiene, reporting sickness, illnesses, but most importantly, it needs to be accredited. So make sure that you look into programs that are accredited and cover the basic food safety, personal hygiene, and then after that, make sure that there's something in there that covers things that your operation may need. So, cleaning and sanitation, what chemicals do you all use? Make sure that you're training in those specific chemicals and in the spoken languages, of course, of all the individuals in your operation.
Okay. Yes, there's some resources I'm sure we can send to you as well around that. So stay tuned. Okay, here's a question from Nancy. The food code says that plant foods are to be cooked at 135 degrees Fahrenheit. Does this apply to plant-based proteins as well? And she says that actually needs to be validated.
You are absolutely right, Nancy. This does need to be validated. And the thing is, that is not currently in the discussion of the FDA food code for 2022 yet.
Okay.
But from the science perspective, we should be, right? Like we can't, we at least us as individuals in the food industry, we should be being cognizant of what that ultimately looks like as it pertains to plant-based proteins and what it might imply as a plant food or as a protein. But that is not something that is actually discussed in the food code itself. But as we all know, we should be cooking proper temperatures to begin with, but we got to validate everything.
Nancy's following along. She says, yes, 135 degrees Fahrenheit would not kill pathogens in some PB proteins, according to a lab study. So thank you, Nancy. All right, let's switch back over to allergens here. So can we use other allergen precautionary statements other than the may contain statement, like it was produced in a facility that may contain or that has some type of allergen? Do you want me to read that again?
I guess the question is, what are you labeling now?
Yeah.
Let me rephrase that. Based on what I am understanding of this question, may contain, you can use those phrases. However, none of those phrases will preclude you from none of those phrases preclude you from still having proper allergen control and sanitation controls and processing controls to ascertain that you are doing the best that you can to prevent allergen cross contact.
Right. I get it. So little more context is needed, I guess. All right, here's another one here. If tree nuts and peanuts processed in an adjacent building, do these allergens need to be on the label for all products? I guess kind of similarly, they're in the vicinity. So do they need to be on the label?
If they're in the vicinity, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. Yeah, if they're in the vicinity, I think we're going in the same point, Lily. You can go ahead.
If they're in the vicinity, there are other things to consider, like the hygienic flow and the hygienic design of the facility. All of these should be part of your hazard analysis in determining how your allergens and your allergen controls will work. If there is any potential that there could be cross contact, whether it be through environmental or it be through like pathways going in and out of your rooms or from people, then that might be something that you would consider. At the same time, you should be also doing your best if the way that your production is working and that you are only doing, everything is sectioned off from each other and you only have certain people going in and out through certain ins and outs, that might be a way to lower it. It depends, and it's different for every person and every facility and every case. So without really seeing how your facility is like and how you are managing your risks and your hazards, it is very difficult to make that case either way from us. But we do offer support in that, and if that is something that you may be interested in exploring, we are definitely here to be supportive of you.
Yes, to add to that, if you're doing color coding and the practices, not even sharing the same equipment for your allergen products, then that's one case. But if you're using the same equipment, and even if you're still washing, maybe it goes through the same oven, I would definitely try to make sure that you have those allergens in your packaging, your labeling. As Lily said, Dr. Lily Yang, as she said, we'd be happy to support you to look specifically at your operation, because every operation is different. And the different hazards, the way it's processed, the size of the facility, there's a lot of different factors that need to be looked into when it comes to allergens.
Right. Alexander's joining the conversation. Using the facility allergen list is good as a consumer information. However, the allergen control PC and related sanitation needs to ensure that only the allergens that are supposed to be in the product is in the product.
Thank you.
Yeah. So listen, at the start of this, and we just have a couple more minutes left, we were talking about food safety culture, and you had pointed out one challenge being the over-reliance on food safety systems. Karla, I believe this was one of the things that you had mentioned. Can you expand on that? What do we mean by food safety systems? Are we talking technology, processes?
Yeah, sorry, sir, could you repeat that first part? So what was the question?
It was just a little more context around when you were talking about food safety culture, and you had mentioned that one of the challenges was an over-reliance to food safety systems.
Yes. So good question. So having an over-reliance on food safety systems can also kind of, come back to bite you. An example off the top of my head that I can think of is, as an example, let's say that your facility has great self-auditing procedures, and every so often, XYZ person, they do your self-audit checklist. Now, you have that in place, your food safety system, but then you may be biting yourself in the butt. And I know this happened recently in an inspection I did, an audit to help a client, that they were doing all of these inspections, but they weren't going back and seeing what items needed to be corrected. So they were having all of these documents and documentation of all the things that they noticed in their self audits, but they didn't have a procedure afterwards where they were making sure that, monitoring, like, were these items fixed? Otherwise you just have a bunch of documents, a bunch of procedures, but no follow-up to that. So making sure that it flows, that there is an outcome at the end. Maybe even you may be doing too many internal audits. That may be an issue within itself. So making sure you, from an outsider looking in, that you look into the food safety systems. Do they work? The best way to do this is to ask not the managers, but your employees themselves. Ask them for their ideas. They oftentimes have the best ideas because they're there on the floor at all times. So they know, and maybe they even have solutions as to what could be fixed or done better to improve the flow of production in a safe manner.
All right. I hate to say this, but I think our time is up. Dr. Lily, Dr. Karla, you've been truly outstanding. This has been such a great discussion, and I really, really can't wait to have you back at a future FISMA Friday. But before we just leave for the day, let's just throw this back up on the screen. There's a lot of great resources from Safety Chain around food traceability, around FISMA. Please do check us out at safetychain.com. Also, check out the TAG website, the Acheson Group. They have a ton of resources. And again, please connect with these folks. They are the experts. They're the ones that go into the plants. They see the problems. They're helping folks every single day. Please do reach out to our friends at the Acheson Group. Again, I appreciate everybody's questions during this discussion. And of course, the presentation itself. You both are very wonderful. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you
Thank
all,
you,
and thank you for
and
tuning
thank
in.
you, everyone.